I was standing at the door of my own office when the security guard stopped me from entering. "Sorry, sir, but you don't work here anymore." 22 years. 22 years building that hydraulic supply company from scratch, and now a uniformed kid who barely knew my name was keeping me from entering the building I had bought myself. My throat tightened, but forcing my way in wouldn't solve anything. The paper he held, a court order, was real. My company had been frozen. My assets, blocked. My bank account, emptied. 3 weeks ago, I was the owner of a fortune worth nearly $10 million. I had a big house in an upscale neighborhood, 2 imported cars, a family I thought loved me. Today, I was being kicked out of the building that bore my last name on the facade. It all started with a manila envelope that arrived in the mail on a rainy Tuesday. My wife was in the kitchen, making coffee. I remember the smell of toasted bread mixed with the expensive perfume she had been wearing lately, a perfume I didn't recognize, but she said she had received from a friend. I opened the envelope without suspecting anything. Inside, there was a divorce notice and a list of accusations that made me feel as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. Emotional abuse. Emotional neglect. Concealment of assets. Financial infidelity. I read it 3 times before I could speak. "What is this?" I asked, raising the papers toward her. She didn't even look at me. She kept stirring the coffee with the spoon, slowly, as if rehearsed. "It's the divorce. You were never present. I'm tired of waiting." Present? I worked every day of my life to give a good life to you and the children. She finally looked at me, and there was something different in her eyes. Something cold. Calculated. "You worked for yourself. Me and the kids were just accessories in your successful life." I tried to argue. I tried to remember family vacations, dinners, nights when I came home exhausted just to be with them. But every word I said seemed to fall into a void. She had ready answers for everything. Answers too sharp. Answers that seemed to have been written by someone else. And they had been. 2 days later, I met her lawyer. A man in an impeccable suit, perfectly combed gray hair, a smile of someone who had already won before the fight even began. He introduced himself as a high-net-worth divorce specialist. When I shook his hand, I felt I was facing someone who did this not for justice, but for sport. "Let's be practical," he said, sitting across the negotiation table. "Your wife is asking for half of everything. Considering the documented accusations, it's the least she deserves." Documented? What documents? This is all lies. He opened a folder and began piling papers in front of me. Screenshots of conversations I didn't remember having. Emails I supposedly sent. Testimonies from employees I barely knew, claiming I was absent, rude, negligent. Each page seemed carefully fabricated to destroy me. "Where did you get this?" I asked, my stomach churning. "Legitimate findings, sir. All within the law." But it wasn't. I knew it wasn't. It was set up, pure manipulation. But who would believe me? A rich businessman complaining he was being wronged? The narrative was already set. The absent husband who put work above family and now didn't want to share what he had achieved. The judge who ruled on the preliminary case barely looked at me. He skimmed the documents, asked a few vague questions to her lawyer, and then slammed the gavel. Total asset freeze. Absurd temporary alimony. Restriction of contact with my own children until a full psychological evaluation. I left that hearing feeling as if I had just been buried alive. That's when I discovered the third character in this plot. One afternoon, while collecting some belongings from the house that was no longer mine, I found a forgotten note inside a drawer in her closet. It was crumpled, handwritten with a masculine handwriting I didn't recognize. "Everything is going according to plan. A few more weeks and he will have nothing. After that, we will be free." There was no signature. But in the lower corner, scribbled as if a joke between lovers, was a small heart and the initials V and D. Veronica. My wife. And someone whose name started with D. When I confronted my lawyer with this, he shook his head pityingly. "That proves nothing legally. It could be anyone. We need solid evidence." But I didn't need legal proof to know the truth. My wife wasn't just leaving me. She was deliberately destroying me. And there was someone by her side, guiding every step, every lie, every blow. 2 weeks later, I lost everything. The company was sold at a judicial auction to cover marital debts I didn't even know existed. The house was seized. The cars, taken. My bank account, which once had 6 digits before the decimal, now showed a negative balance. I moved to a one-bedroom apartment in the suburbs, the kind of place where the walls are so thin you can hear your neighbor's entire life. My friends stopped answering my calls. My partners, who once called me a visionary, now avoided mentioning my name in conversations. I had become invisible. Worse than invisible, I had become a cautionary tale. The story people told to remember that success can disappear overnight. One night, sitting alone in that apartment that smelled of mold and regret, I looked at the reflection in the window and didn't recognize the man staring back at me. Too thin. Deep dark circles under the eyes. Unshaven beard. I looked like someone who had given up. And maybe I had. Until 3 days later, while rummaging through an old box of documents my mother had given me years ago, things from my grandfather, she said, for when you need them, I found something that would change everything. A small booklet, faded blue hardcover, with the words passbook account, printed in nearly faded gold. Inside, handwritten in ink that had already faded with time, were records of deposits made in 1950. $50. Just $50, deposited by my grandfather into an account I didn't even know existed. But there was more. A note on the last page, written in his firm handwriting. For my grandson. When everything seems lost, remember, true wealth grows in silence. I didn't understand at the time. I was too tired, too broken to process anything that seemed hopeful. But something inside me, maybe instinct, maybe desperation, made me call the bank the next day. And what I discovered on that call would change not only my life, but the fate of everyone who tried to destroy me. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because what comes next will leave you stunned. The bank clerk took 15 minutes just to find the account record. Sir, this is from 1950. Our current system doesn't directly access accounts that old. I'll need to contact the Historical Archives Department. I was in a small branch in the city center, holding that faded blue passbook as if it were my last lottery ticket. People in line behind me sighed impatiently. A white-haired lady looked at me with pity, probably thinking I was some crazy man trying to retrieve money from a non-existent account. Please, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It's all I have left from my grandfather. I just want to know if there's still anything there. She typed a few more things, frowned, typed again. Then her eyes widened in a way that made my heart race. Sir, you'll need to speak with the manager. Now. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in a glass-walled office, facing a middle-aged man with reading glasses hanging on his neck. He had printed 3 pages of a report and read them in silence, running his finger along the lines as if checking something impossible. Your grandfather opened this account in 1950 with $50, he said, without looking up from the paper. It was what they called a century growth account. A product that doesn't even exist anymore. Compound interest at a rate absurdly high by today's standards. And how much is in it? I asked, feeling my mouth go dry. He finally looked at me. There was something between incredulity and reverence in his gaze. The account accrued interest for 75 years without ever being touched. Additionally, there are records that your grandfather, in 1965, converted part of the balance into shares of a company called Berkshire Hathaway. At the time, each share cost less than $20. I knew the name. Everyone with even a minimal understanding of investing knew Berkshire Hathaway. Warren Buffett's company. One of the most valuable stocks in the world. How much? I repeated, my voice almost a whisper. He turned the paper toward me. The number on the last line had so many digits that for a second I thought it was a printing error. $13,460,000. I couldn't breathe. Literally. I felt as if someone had sucked all the air out of the room. 13 million. The money I had lost, plus another third. Hidden for decades in an account my grandfather opened when my father was still a child. How did I not know this? I managed to ask. Century accounts were designed precisely for this. Silent growth, no movement, no notifications. The idea was to create an intergenerational legacy. Your grandfather probably expected someone in the family to discover it at the right time. And the right time was now. When I was destroyed. When I had nothing left. When everyone thought I was just another man who lost everything in a messy divorce. How long until I can access that money? I asked, trying not to sound desperate. With the correct documentation and proof that you are the sole direct heir, about 2 weeks. But sir, he leaned forward, lowering his voice, an amount of this size will attract attention. A lot of attention. If you are facing legal proceedings, I suggest you speak to a lawyer before moving anything. He was right. If my wife and her lawyer discovered this account, they would do everything to include it in the divorce proceedings. They would claim I hid assets. They would use it against me in every way possible. I needed a plan. And more importantly, I needed help. But not just any lawyer. I needed someone who knew how to play the same dirty game they were playing with me. It took me 3 days to find him. He didn't have a fancy office. No smiling receptionist. No waiting room with gourmet coffee. He worked out of an old building in the financial district, 3rd floor, door with no nameplate. But his name circulated in the courthouse corridors like an urban legend. The lawyer who never lost. The man who dissected schemes that seemed perfect and turned them to dust. When I entered his office, I found a man in his 60s, thin, bald, with eyes that seemed to see 3 steps ahead of any conversation. "You're the businessman who lost everything in 6 weeks," he said before I could introduce myself. "I read about your case. I worked too fast. Too clean. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. Can you help me?" I asked, sitting in the old leather chair across his desk. "It depends. Do you want justice or revenge?" "I want my life back." He smiled. It was a small, almost imperceptible smile, but it carried the weight of someone who had seen this movie before. "Then you want both. I'll need everything. Every document, every email, every conversation. And most importantly," he pointed to the folder I was carrying, "I need to know what you're hiding." I hesitated a second. But I had no choice. I put the blue passbook on the table and told him everything about my grandfather's account. He listened in silence, not interrupting, only making occasional notes in a yellowed notebook. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his hands as if praying. "That account changes everything," he said. "But only if we play it right. First, don't move a cent until I tell you. Second, we're going to investigate your case from back to front. If I'm right, what they did to you wasn't just unethical. It was illegal." "Illegal how?" "Manufacturing evidence. Bribing witnesses. Possibly judicial corruption." He leaned forward. "Do you know the judge who handled your case?" "Only by name. It all happened so fast I barely had time to process it." "Exactly. That kind of speed isn't normal. I'll need 2 weeks to gather everything. Meanwhile, live your life as if you're still broke. Don't change anything. Don't buy anything. Don't tell anyone about the account." 2 weeks sounded like an eternity when each passing day was a new humiliation. But I trusted him. I had no other option. While he investigated, I went back to that miserable apartment and pretended my life was over. I ate instant noodles. Wore the same 3 old shirts. Ignored the pitying looks of people on the street. But inside, something had changed. I wasn't broken anymore. I was waiting. And waiting with a purpose is completely different from giving up. It was on the 10th night that I received his call. "Found it," he said, without preamble. "The judge who ruled your case received suspicious deposits in the last 6 weeks. 3 transfers of odd amounts, made by a shell company. Guess who owns that company?" "Her lawyer." "Exactly. He's done this before. 4 times in the last 8 years. Always the same pattern: millionaire divorces, ultra-fast rulings, division absurdly favorable to the wife. And always with the same judge." A wave of rage rose in my throat. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a scheme. Professional. Repeated. I wasn't the first. I was just another victim of a system they had perfected. "And my wife?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "She's not just his client. From phone records I accessed, they talk every day. Multiple times. And the conversation started 8 months before she filed for divorce. 8 months. She had planned this for 8 months while sleeping next to me, while kissing me good morning, while saying she loved me. What do we do now? I asked, gripping the phone so hard my fingers went white. Now. He paused. Now we destroy them. But there was a problem. A problem I would only discover 3 days later, when he called me at 2 in the morning, his voice tense in a way I hadn't heard before. They know. Know what? About the account. I don't know how, but they know. They just filed a petition claiming you hid assets during the divorce. They want the account frozen and the money included in the division. My blood went cold. Everything I had waited for, all the patience, all the planning, would go down the drain if they managed to freeze that account before I could access it. How did they find out? I shouted, more to myself than to him. Someone at the bank talked. Or they hacked your phone. Or they just got lucky. It doesn't matter anymore. We have 72 hours before the emergency hearing. If we don't act now, you lose everything again. He was right. But this time I wasn't going to let it happen. This time I had something they didn't expect. I had the truth. And more importantly, I had 13 million reasons to fight to the end. What do you need me to do? I asked, feeling an odd calm come over me. Trust me. And get ready. Because in the next 72 hours, we're going to turn this game upside down. And that's exactly what happened. The following 72 hours were the most intense of my life. My lawyer set up an operation that looked like it had come straight out of a movie. On the first morning, he took me to an office I had never seen, on the top floor of an almost empty commercial building. 3 people were waiting. A private investigator, a forensic accountant, and a retired prosecutor now working as a consultant. These people are going to save your life, he said, pointing to each one. But you need to do exactly as I say. No questions. No hesitation. Understood. I nodded. There was no room for doubt anymore. The investigator spoke first. He was a short man, wearing thick glasses, carrying a folder full of printed documents. I managed to trace all communications between your wife's lawyer and the judge over the last 2 years. They weren't careful enough. They used personal emails, text messages, even calls from phones registered in their names. Amateurs. He spread the prints on the table. Conversations about amounts, how to conduct hearings, how to fabricate procedural urgencies. It was all there. Black on white. An entire scheme documented by sheer arrogance. How did you get this? I asked, impressed. Don't ask. But it's all legal. It can be used in court. The accountant went next. A woman in her 40s, hair tied back, serious expression. I analyzed your wife's finances over the last 12 months. She opened 3 new accounts in different banks, all under the names of companies that don't actually exist. Regular transfers coming from a holding company owned by the lawyer. She has been receiving money from him for almost a year. Money from where? I asked, my stomach churning. From other clients. He diverts a percentage of the divorce settlements he secures and passes it on to the wives before the process ends. That's how he ensures total cooperation. They're not just cheating on their husbands. They're being paid to do it. My wife hadn't left me because she was unhappy. She had left because someone offered her money. It was a business. Coldly calculated. And I was just another number on the target list. How much has she received? My voice came out hoarse. So far? $250,000. $250,000. The price she put on 20 years of marriage. The retired prosecutor spoke last. His hair was completely white and a thin scar ran across his forehead. This isn't just a poorly handled divorce case. It's organized crime. Extortion, fraud, judicial corruption. We have enough evidence to open a criminal investigation. But we need to do it the right way. If we hand everything over now, they'll claim the evidence was obtained illegally. We need to force them to incriminate themselves. How? I asked. My lawyer smiled. The same small smile I had seen at our first meeting. The smile of someone who already knows how the game ends. Let them think they've won. Let them get confident. And then, at the right moment, we reveal our cards. The plan was risky. Very risky. But I had nothing to lose. Over the next 48 hours, I did exactly as he instructed. I didn't respond to their petition. I didn't contest. I didn't show that I knew anything. I kept living like a defeated man, walking the streets with my head down, eating at cheap restaurants, wearing old clothes. But inside, every fiber of my body was on fire. Meanwhile, my lawyer worked behind the scenes. He contacted a federal prosecutor investigating judicial corruption cases in the region. He presented all the evidence we had. She spent 2 hours reading everything in silence and then said just one word: impressive. She opened an official investigation that same afternoon. But with one condition: nothing could leak before the hearing. They needed to catch the judge and the lawyer in flagrante confident, acting as they always had. On the eve of the hearing, I received a call from my wife. We hadn't spoken for weeks. Her voice on the phone was irritatingly calm, almost sweet. "Hi. Just wanted to let you know tomorrow will be quick. My lawyer said the judge has already reviewed everything and the decision should be immediate. About the account you tried to hide, well, it was a pathetic attempt. But I'm not surprised. You are always better at making money than keeping secrets." She laughed. A short, cutting laugh. "Anyway, the day after tomorrow it's all over. You can move on with your life, I'll move on with mine. No hard feelings, right?" I took a deep breath. Every cell in my body wanted to scream, to tell her everything I knew, to throw in her face that I was no longer the broken man she thought she had destroyed. But I held back. "No hard feelings," I repeated, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Great. See you tomorrow." She hung up. I stared at the phone in my hand, trembling with contained anger. But I also felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: control. For the first time since it all began, I wasn't being pushed. I was pulling the strings. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the thin mattress of that horrible apartment, staring at the cracked ceiling, going over every detail of the plan in my head. My lawyer had said everything depended on timing. 1 second early, one wrong word, and the entire scheme could collapse. At 5 in the morning, I gave up trying to sleep. I took a cold shower, put on the only dress shirt I still had, and went to the courthouse. The courtroom was almost empty when I arrived. Only a few people scattered in the back chairs. My wife was sitting in the front row, next to her lawyer. He wore a perfectly tailored gray suit and smiled at her as if they were old friends. Or maybe more than friends. The closeness between them was far too obvious to be just professional. When she saw me enter, her face changed. For a second, I saw something like pity. Then, nothing. Only coldness. The judge entered precisely at 9 o'clock. A man in his 50s, gray hair, upright posture. He greeted my wife's lawyer with an almost imperceptible nod. They knew each other very well. "Good morning. Let's get straight to the point," he said, adjusting his glasses. "I am here to review the emergency petition regarding the discovery of hidden assets by the defendant." "Sir," he looked at me, "do you have anything to declare before I make my decision?" I looked at my lawyer. He was sitting beside me, still, expression neutral. But his eyes said one very clear thing: not yet. "No, Your Honor," I replied. The judge nodded and began reading a decision that was clearly written before the hearing even began. Immediate account freeze. Transfer of 50% of the funds to my wife. Fine for hiding assets. Every word was a hammer blow to my supposed defeat. My wife smiled. Her lawyer smiled. The judge spoke with the confidence of someone who had done this dozens of times. And then, at the exact moment he was about to strike the gavel, the doors of the room opened. 3 federal agents entered, followed by the prosecutor who had reviewed our case. She carried a thick folder and had an expression that made the judge's smile vanish instantly. "Your Honor," she said, voice clear and firm. "On behalf of the Department of Justice, I request the immediate suspension of this hearing. We have arrest warrants for you and the petitioner's defense attorney." The silence that followed was deafening. I saw my wife's face lose all color. Her lawyer stood, trying to maintain composure, but his voice trembled. "This is absurd. On what grounds?" The prosecutor opened the folder and began reading. Conspiracy to commit fraud. Judicial corruption. Extortion. Evidence falsification. Money laundering. The list was long. And with each accusation, I watched the empire they had built collapse like a house of cards. "We have recordings. Bank records. Witnesses. And 4 other cases identical to this gentleman's, she pointed at me. All conducted by you two, following the same pattern. I looked at my wife. She was panicking, looking around like a cornered animal. Finally, her eyes met mine. And in that moment, she understood. I had not surrendered. I had waited. I had planned. And I had won. The agents handcuffed the judge and the lawyer. They were taken away silently, without resistance, because they knew there was nowhere to run. My wife tried to leave the room, but the prosecutor stopped her. You will also need to come with us. We have some questions regarding the $250,000 you received over the last 12 months. She looked at me one last time. There was no coldness left. Only fear. And I felt no pity at all. The courtroom turned into chaos. Reporters who had been waiting outside began rushing in as soon as they saw the handcuffs. Flashes went off. Cameras recorded. The judge tried to cover his face with his cuffed hands as he was escorted out. Her lawyer shouted something about constitutional rights, but no one was listening. My wife froze in the middle of it all, as if she couldn't process what was happening. A federal agent approached her with a pair of handcuffs. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me." "I didn't do anything," she shouted, her voice high and desperate. "I didn't know any of this." The prosecutor turned to her, an expression mixing contempt with something close to pity. "You received $250,000 in 12 months from a man under investigation for corruption. You signed false documents. You gave statements you knew were lies. You knew, yes." My wife looked at me again, this time with tears in her eyes. "You did this," she whispered, as if she still couldn't believe it. "You knew all along and didn't say anything." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. She had destroyed me methodically, sleeping next to me while planning every step of my ruin. And now she expected me to feel something? Guilt? Remorse? I felt nothing but relief. She was taken away in silence, the handcuffs shining under the court lights. I watched as the 3 of them disappeared down the corridor, swallowed by federal agents and camera flashes. When the doors closed, silence returned. Heavy. Final. My lawyer placed a hand on my shoulder. "It's over," he said simply. But it wasn't over. Not completely. In the following 3 days, everything came to light. The federal investigation revealed a scheme that had been running for nearly a decade. The judge and the lawyer had orchestrated more than 20 fraudulent divorces, destroying entire families to fill their pockets. The wives were recruited, paid in advance, and instructed to follow a specific script: accusations of emotional abuse, forged documents, bought witnesses. My case was just another one. But it was the one that brought them all down. The media devoured the story. Newspapers ran headlines about judicial corruption. TV programs spent hours debating how something like this could go undetected for so long. My wife became the face of a national fraud. She was no longer just the woman who betrayed me. She was the woman who embodied an entire system of greed and manipulation. As for me, I became a symbol. The man who lost everything and managed to rise again. The man who exposed a corruption scheme that no one else had dared to confront. But the truth was simpler and less heroic than the headlines suggested. I had just been lucky. Lucky to find that blue passbook. Lucky to have a grandfather who thought about the future when he planted $50 in an account that grew silently for 75 years. Without that, I would have been just another forgotten victim. The divorce reversal took 2 weeks. The new judge assigned to the case reviewed all the evidence and declared that the original process was a judicial farce of criminal proportions. All the assets that had been taken from me were returned. The company, which had been sold at auction, was repurchased for less than it was worth, and I regained full control. But something inside me had changed. When I looked at that building, the building I had built with my own hands, I no longer felt the same pride. I felt fatigue. I felt distance. I didn't want that life anymore. 3 months after the arrest, I received an unexpected call. It was one of the partners who had abandoned me when everything fell apart. His voice was cautious, almost ashamed. I saw what happened. I read about everything. I wanted to apologize. I should have stood by you. I took a deep breath. Part of me wanted to hang up in his face. But another part, the part tired of carrying anger, simply said, "It's okay. People do what they can with what they know. There was a pause on the other end. Are you going back to the company? No. I'm going to sell. Sell? But you built that from scratch. Exactly. I built it once. I don't need to do it again. I hung up before he could respond. The sale of the company took 6 weeks. A group of investors offered $12 million. It was less than its peak value, but more than enough. Combined with the $13 million from my grandfather's account, I had $25 million. Enough money to never work another day in my life. But I didn't want to stop working. I just wanted to work on something that mattered. That's when I had the idea. Sitting in that same horrible apartment where I had spent the worst days of my life, I looked at my grandfather's blue passbook. I thought about how $50, planted with patience and wisdom, had turned into a fortune. I thought about how many people would never have access to that kind of knowledge. How many people were, at that very moment, working hard without understanding how money really works. I opened my laptop and began writing. 2 weeks later, I registered a non-profit foundation. The name was simple: Silent Legacy. The mission was to teach financial education to ordinary people. Not to wealthy entrepreneurs or investors, but to families living paycheck to paycheck, to young people who didn't know the difference between investing and saving, to anyone who needed to understand that wealth is not about how much you earn, but about how you manage what you have. I used $5 million to set everything up. I hired teachers, rented community spaces, created free online courses. The foundation had nothing fancy. No fundraising galas, no dinners with celebrities. It was just real people teaching other real people not to make the same mistakes I had made. Because in the end, I realized something fundamental. I had lost my $10 million not because I was betrayed. I lost it because I built an empire without a solid foundation beneath it. I worked so hard to accumulate that I forgot to protect. Forgot to educate. Forgot to be present. My grandfather's money saved me. But his lesson transformed me. 6 months after the foundation opened its doors, I gave my first public lecture. It was in a small gymnasium at a school in a low-income neighborhood. About 200 people sat in the bleachers. Entire families, young people, the elderly. People who had come to learn. I began by telling my story. I didn't hide anything. I spoke about the betrayal, the scheme, how I lost everything. But I also spoke about the blue passbook. About my grandfather's $50. About how patience and knowledge can transform a life. When I finished, the room was completely silent. Then slowly, one person began to applaud. Then another. And another. Until the whole room was standing clapping, not for me, but for the idea that it was possible to start over. A woman in the front row approached afterward. She was holding the hand of a 10-year-old girl. My husband died 2 years ago and left me only debts. I don't know how I'll pay for my daughter's school. But after hearing you, I think there's a way. I think I can do it. I knelt down to be at the girl's level. What's your name? Anna. Anna, your mother is a strong woman. And you will grow up seeing that. One day when you're older, you will teach others too. And this cycle won't stop. The girl smiled. And in that smile, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time: hope. I left that gymnasium and drove to the cemetery where my grandfather was buried. It had been years since I had been there. I sat on the grass next to his tombstone, worn by time, and held the blue passbook in my hands. Thank you, I said aloud, to the wind, to the silence, to the memory of a man who would never know the impact he had caused. You saved me. And now I'm going to save others. It was there, sitting on that grass, that I understood the final lesson. My grandfather hadn't left that account to make me rich. He had left it to teach me that a true legacy is not what you accumulate. It's what you plant in silence, hoping that someone someday will find it and make it flourish. 2 years have passed since that day in court. Today, I wake up in a simple apartment downtown. It's not luxurious. There's no ocean view, no rooftop pool. But it's mine. And more importantly, it's honest. Every piece of furniture was purchased with purpose. Every object has a story. There's nothing here meant just to impress. I drink my coffee while looking out the window at the busy street below. People going to work, children going to school, life happening at its natural pace. There's something comforting about being part of it without needing to be above it. My phone vibrates. It's a message from the foundation coordinator. We've reached 10,000 students graduating from our financial education courses. We need to discuss expansion. 10,000 people. 10,000 families who now understand the difference between good debt and bad debt. Who know how compound interest works. Who won't fall into the same traps I fell into. I smile and reply that I'll schedule a meeting for the afternoon. Before leaving, I take my grandfather's blue passbook. It's kept in a drawer next to my bed, along with a photo of him I found in the family archives. In the photo, he is young, smiling, holding my father as a baby in his arms. There's a simplicity in that smile that always calms me. I take the passbook with me whenever I give lectures. It's not superstition. It's remembrance. It's to never forget where the second chance I was given came from. The foundation operates in an old renovated building in the oldest part of the city. It used to be a textile factory. Now it's a space with classrooms, computers, a small library, and an auditorium where we hold weekly lectures. The walls are decorated with financial education quotes written by the students themselves. My favorite is right at the entrance. Wealth begins when you stop pretending you have it. When I arrive, there's a line of people waiting to enroll in the new courses. I see faces of all ages, all colors, all stories. An elderly man waits patiently with a notebook under his arm. A young mother fills out the form while holding a baby. Two teenagers chat excitedly about the online investment class they attended. It's for them that all of this exists. I go up to my office, which is really just a small room with an old desk and a chair. The coordinator is already waiting. "We need more space," she says bluntly. "We have a waiting list of 3,000 people. If we want to serve everyone, we'll need to open 2 more centers. One in the North Zone and another in the metropolitan area. How much will it cost?" "About $2 million to set up both." $2 million. A few years ago, that number would have knotted my stomach. Today, it's just an investment in something that matters. "Approved," I say. "But keep the same standard. No unnecessary luxury. The money has to go to the teachers and the students." She smiles. She knows that's always been the rule. After the meeting, I go down to the auditorium. Today is an open lecture, and the topic is how to protect your assets from bad decisions. About 300 people are seated, waiting. I recognize a few faces, students returning to listen again, bringing friends and family. I step onto the small stage and adjust the microphone. "Good afternoon. Before we begin, I want to tell you a story. My story. And I tell it. I speak about success, betrayal, the fall. I speak about the corrupt judge and the scheme that almost destroyed me. But I also speak about the blue passbook. About my grandfather's $50 that turned into a fortune because he understood something simple. Patience and wisdom are worth more than haste and ambition. I lost almost everything once," I say, looking at the audience. "I lost it by trusting the wrong people. By not protecting what I built. By working so much that I forgot to live. But when I found this passbook, I hold the object up, I realized my grandfather had left me something much greater than money. He left me a lesson." I pause. The auditorium is completely silent. The lesson is this: true power is not what you show. It's what you keep. It's what you plant in silence and let grow without haste. My grandfather never told me he had opened that account. He never bragged. He never tried to impress anyone. He simply planted a seed and trusted that, when the time came, someone would find it. A hand rises in the audience. A man in his 30s, looking concerned. "And what if we don't have $50 to plant? What if we can barely pay this month's bills?" It's an honest question. And it deserves an honest answer. Then you start with 5. Or with 1. The amount doesn't matter. What matters is starting. My grandfather lived during the Great Depression. $50 back then was a fortune. But he chose to invest instead of spend. Not because he was rich, but because he understood that the future matters as much as the present. I see some people taking notes. Others simply listen, absorbing every word. I know not everyone will apply everything I teach. But if even 10% leave here with a new idea, with a different perspective, it's worth it. After the lecture, I stay nearby to talk with anyone who wants to. It's always my favorite part. The individual questions, the personal stories, the fears and hopes people carry. An elderly man approaches, eyes moist. I spent my whole life working and have nothing left. Now I'm 70 and I don't know how I'll support myself. Is it too late? I place a hand on his shoulder. It's never too late to understand. It's never too late to do things differently. You can't change the past, but you can teach your children and grandchildren not to make the same mistakes. That alone is a legacy. He thanks me with a firm handshake and walks away, wiping his eyes. I spend the entire afternoon there, talking, listening, helping. When the sun begins to set and the auditorium empties, I sit alone in the front row and look at the empty stage. I think about everything that has changed. Who I was and who I've become. Before, I measured success in numbers. How many contracts closed, how much money in the bank, how many zeros in the account. Today, I measure it in lives touched. In families who have escaped debt. In young people who learned how to invest before falling into bad loans. My phone vibrates. It's a notification about a report on the corrupt judge's case. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison. The lawyer, 15. My ex-wife, 5, but was released on parole after 2 for good behavior and cooperation. I feel no anger. I feel no satisfaction. I just feel nothing. All of that seems to belong to another life, another person. On the way back home, I pass the building where my old company used to be. Today it's a department store. The sign with my surname has been replaced by colorful neon advertising sales. I pause for a moment and look up at the windows where my office once was. I feel no longing. I get home when it's already dark. I make a simple dinner, as I do every night. While I eat, I look at the blue passbook on the table. I had decided something a few months ago, but hadn't yet found the courage to act. Today is the day. I take the passbook and a pen. On the last page, just below my grandfather's note, I write my own message. To whoever finds this in the future, the money in this account has already served its purpose. It saved me when I needed it most. But true wealth is not in the bank balance. It's in the choice to use what you have to help others grow. Plant your own seed. Let it grow in silence. And when the time comes, use it wisely. I close the passbook and put it back in the drawer. Tomorrow, I will do something my grandfather never imagined. I will turn the rest of his account into a permanent fund for the foundation. 2 million have already been used for expansion. The remaining 11 million will ensure the foundation continues to exist forever, teaching generation after generation, even after I am no longer here. Because true legacy is not what you leave for people. It's what you leave inside them. Before sleeping, I look one last time at my grandfather's photo. I imagine what it would be like to tell him all this. To thank him in person for planting those $50 more than 70 years ago. But maybe he already knows. Maybe, in some way, he always knew that money wasn't the real gift. The gift was the lesson. And that lesson is finally being passed on. I close my eyes and sleep in peace for the first time in years. If this story touched you in any way, subscribe to the channel. Because in the end, we're all building some kind of legacy. The question is, what legacy do you want to leave?